It feels like nearly everybody now texts all the time. That's probably the primary way most of us communicate with the people we love. My parents are pushing 80, and that's how we communicate now. It used to be phone calls. Now, usually, it's texts. You know what would be a very interesting way to get to know ourselves a little better, maybe the hidden part of ourselves, would be to take a look on our phone at our most frequently used emojis. Wouldn't that be interesting? To see which are the ones that we use the most. We would hope it wasn't like thumbs down or that red-faced guy who's all scrunched. One of the ones that I really love is probably no surprise. It's this one. I bet a lot of you use this one quite a bit. Do you know if you look it up in the emoji search engine, it has two different names. The first name is praying. So if you write someone a message that says, "I'm praying for you," you will likely have it suggest to you, try this emoji. But it's also namaste, which is a word some of you might know. It's used in Eastern religions more than the West, but it means the presence of God inside of me recognizes and honors the presence of God inside of you. I see you as a child of God. It's interesting that Pope Benedict, the Pope immediately preceding Pope Francis, once said, "If you want to understand the Holy Spirit in as simple and clear a way as possible, know that the Holy Spirit is the soul of your soul." Interesting image. The Holy Spirit is the soul of the soul. So everybody you meet has a soul, and inside of that soul is the Holy Spirit, is God, which means that the entire world is populated by God's presence. And then you start thinking more deeply about that, and you realize, wait a minute, the world was created by God. So we're living on a planet created by God, breathing air made by God, drinking water created by God, and then all the people shoulder to shoulder with us have the Holy Spirit in the soul of their soul. We are just infused, just inundated with God's presence all the time, which is what makes life inherently trustworthy. We actually can trust life because it's made by God, and it's populated with all the people containing God inside of them. So if God is love, as the scriptures tell us, then that's a whole lot of love. It makes life trustworthy, that even in the hard times, we can know that we can trust life in the big picture. It doesn't mean there won't be terrible days. It doesn't mean there won't be really hard chapters. But it's a trustworthy journey. St. Catherine of Siena said, "All the way to heaven is heaven. All the way to heaven is itself heaven." So another way to say that might be, if your final destination is glory, are you really going to spend a lot of time complaining about what a bad year 1992 was for you? What does it matter? All the way to heaven is heaven. Maybe all of those things that we've been through were not setbacks. They were simply part of what makes our lives rich and meaningful. If the whole operation is made out of love, then we can trust it. Nothing can cancel that out. If God has infused the whole operation with divine love, then we can trust life. It's inherently trustworthy. I can start to relax into that And it doesn't contain any promises about what will happen tomorrow, because we don't need those promises. We know that whatever happens is part of a loving, larger operation. A friend of mine went through a terrible divorce several years ago, and it was completely disorienting. It left her as the single mother of 3 kids, and she had to leave where she had been living with her ex because they had to sell the house. And so she moved back to her hometown for the first time since she was a teenager as a single mom with 3 kids. And when the realtor was showing her apartments in her hometown that she could afford, they were awful. They were dismal. They were depressing. And it made her feel all the worse. She thought, how can I return to my hometown after I left in the 80s with all this promise? And now I'm coming back, and I'm a single mom with 3 kids, and I'm going to be living in this horrible dump of an apartment. As the realtor was showing her around and all of that was rolling in the back of her head, the realtor opened a closet door to show her a closet. And who knows why she saw it, but there in the back of the closet, left by someone who no longer lived there, was a little something that had fallen in the crack between the baseboard and the wall. And when she reached to see what it was, who knows why she did that, on a tour of a house, she pulled out what was between the baseboard and the wall, and it was her father's prayer card from his funeral. You see, life is inherently trustworthy. The whole operation is made out of love. That doesn't mean that there aren't chapters that are horrible, episodes that are almost unbearable, but the whole operation is trustworthy. We can figure that out if we trust the Holy Spirit to guide us. As we celebrate Joe today, I am thinking of someone who is certainly here in so many forms. Conrad, her kid's dad, her husband of many years. He died suddenly in 2006. Father Mackey was the celebrant at his funeral. And one of the things that really stood out to me was, after talking with Joe about Connie and how wonderful he was and how much she loved him, I decided to go back and see if I could find his obituary online, just to see if I could learn a little more about him. And this line stood out to me. It was written by Joe with the help of her children in the middle of the shock of losing their dad and husband suddenly. Family is the most important thing was Connie's life motto. We invite Connie's family and friends to gather with Joe, his children, their spouses and friends, and his grandchildren to remember his life with gratitude and joy. That's trusting life. This was the worst thing that could have happened. It's the thing that no one anticipated, that no one wanted. But because life is inherently trustworthy, because the whole operation is infused with love, we can, even on the saddest day, say, let's gather with some gratitude and joy, because this is all going a beautiful, glorious direction. Today's a horrible day on that journey, but that's not what the journey's about. On the day that Jesus ascended into heaven, he said, from now on, you won't see me. I'm going to be invisible. But you don't need me to be visible to have a relationship with me. After all, you're going to be too busy doing my work. You've got a lot on your plate. Get busy. Because I'm going to be with the Father, and we will be invisible, but we will be more present to you than ever. God, since then, has been completely invisible to us. Not because God is nowhere, but because God is everywhere. And it introduces us to the reality that all of the most important things in life are invisible. Your marriage is invisible. Our priesthood is invisible. Our relationships, our callings, parenthood, it's all invisible. But it's the most important thing in life. And our relationship with God is in that category, with the most important things. So if the Holy Spirit is the soul of our souls, we no longer have to be grasping out there somewhere for God. We can actually point to where the Spirit is active and alive. We don't have to be grasping. But then again, we can look wherever we want and we're going to see God's presence because God made everything. The whole operation is infused with love. So this week we are being invited to maybe shift our thinking from life stinks and then you die, which is honestly what we hear a lot in life, to, wait a minute, if God is in charge of this whole operation, who could be against us? Jesus says, if God is for us, who can be against us? So, what if there's nothing to wait around for? What if we don't have to wait for the good stuff? What if the good stuff is happening right now? All the way to heaven is heaven.